Muy buenos días nuevamente al amable público que nos visitan de diversas ciudades. Les damos nuevamente la bienvenida. Las personas que llegaron posterior a la inauguración tengan una muy cordial bienvenida al Tecnológico de Monterrey. Nuestra primer conferencia magistral, The Future of the Graduate Programs, es impartida por Michael Fung, quien es el director ejecutivo del Instituto para el Futuro de la Educación del Tecnológico de Monterrey. Michael Fung was formerly the Deputy Chief Executive, Industry, Chief Human Resource Officer, and Chief Data Officer at Skills Future Singapore, SSG, a statutory agency under the Ministry of Education. He is the founding president of the Higher Education Planning in Asia Association, a professional network with more than 1,000 senior university planners and administrators from across Asia. In addition, he was previously senior advisor to the Office of the President at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, HKUST, and Director of Planning and Institutional Research. Con ustedes, Michael Fung.
Ok. Muchas gracias. Hola, buenos días. Soy Michael Fung de Singapur, pero mi español no está bien. Entonces presento en inglés. So very good morning, and very happy to be with you here this morning to share with you some of my thoughts about the future of education, and also specifically about graduate education. So the Institute for the Future Education is an institute at Tecnológico de Monterrey. We have about 80 people in the institute, and we're still growing. I lead the institute together with Pepe Escamilla. Maybe many of you might know him. And we have a range of experiences in the area of higher education, in lifelong learning, in workforce skills development, in different parts of the world. In our institute, we conduct research. We reach out to institutional leaders and policymakers to advocate for concepts around the future of education, and we support different types of innovation in the field of higher education and lifelong learning. Our purpose for the Institute is to impact the lives of millions of people. And we're not going to be able to do that at the Institute alone. We're not going to be able to do that at the Tech, even though we are quite large. We have to work with the educational leaders like yourselves to think about how do we transform education so that it is responsive to the needs of the economy and society. And I share some of the concepts in my presentation. So first, let me just talk about the context for why we think that it's so important to think about transforming education when we think about the future. So we think about the future of work. We're facing a range of disruptions. Now we're all very familiar with the disruption of technology. In the last few years, because of the pandemic, we had to all switch to online classes, online learning, online work. Suddenly, everyone had to learn how to use technology. Our faculty had to learn to use Zoom. Workers in the workplace need to know how to use collaborative tools. We're still doing that today, to a large extent. And so technology has hit higher education, but it has also hit many other industries across our economies. A traditional industry like the legal profession, you would think that they don't need technology. Yeah? They're protected in a bubble of their own. But now with search tools, with AI, a lawyer can search case files at the click of a button much more quickly and much more accurately than a paralegal could. So in countries that have started realizing this, they have started moving the legal fraternity towards more digitalized ways of working. The same could be said about accounting, right? Accountants are now thinking about how to maintain relevance when you can use robo-advisors, you can automate your accounting functions using technology. So technology, clearly, big disruption to jobs, to industries, and consequently, we need to think about the skills and competencies of our graduates, whether you're talking about undergraduate students, postgraduate students, or just the workforce in general. Another disruption that we're seeing is shifting demographics. We live in a fortunate time where advances in medical science is helping us to live longer. So we are facing an aging population, and in many advanced economies, shrinking youth population. And so when we think about an economic structure, a labor force structure as such, how do we ensure that we become more productive to maintain economic growth within our sectors as the workforce size shrinks? Along with that, longevity. We're going to live longer. Linda Grattan and Andrew Scott in the book 100-Year Life talked about us potentially living to 100 years old. Now, maybe in the past, we think that, after working for 20, 30 years, we'll retire. And then we'll, retire to a playa, a resort somewhere and enjoy life, or a different type of life. But if we're going to live to 100, can we really retire at 50 years old, 60? What are you going to do with the 40 years? Where's your earning power going to come from? So we're already starting to work longer. It's quite common that we work to 60, 70, perhaps even 80. Now, we're going to continue to work for life, throughout life. Do we have the right skills and competencies to continue to be relevant to the workplace? Today, if we're not picking up digital skills, we're feel hampered, right? In 10 years' time, if you don't have maybe skills in data, you will start to feel irrelevant. So we need to continue to learn for life as we live longer. The predictions that students that are going into the school system today will switch careers 5 or 6 times in their lifetimes. Not small shifts, major shifts. So that puts a lot of pressure on the kinds of system that we have to ensure ongoing upskilling and reskilling. Shifts in globalization and localization is another disruption. In the last few years, we've seen a rise in tension between the US and China, the Russian and Ukraine war. That's causing major shifts in global supply chains. In Nuevo León, in Monterrey, and in the northern states, we're benefiting from that trend because more companies are now nearshoring to Mexico, to the northern parts, and other parts, central parts are doing well too, to be able to serve large US corporations. What does that mean for the skills of our workforce? If we want to attract those investments, create jobs, these shifts are causing a disruption in the kinds of skills needed in the industry. And I talked about the global pandemic already. We've experienced that, we lived through that, but it's not going to be the last pandemic. It's not going to be the last disruption. The next disruption is going to require us to adapt in terms of the way we work, the kinds of jobs, the kinds of skills. So now I've painted the picture of disruptions. What does that imply on skills development? And I talked a little bit about that earlier. If we're going to keep responding to changes in skills in industry, we need to be flexible. We need to adjust to these changes very quickly. Even though the pandemic was a disaster in many ways, we had to make many adjustments, it is also remarkable to see how flexible we were as a country, as a global community, in terms of responding to these changes. Yes, many jobs were affected, many livelihoods were affected, but I've never seen that kind of determined, concerted efforts across different countries to address these issues. And to a large extent, we didn't have a choice. So when push came to shove, we were actually quite willing to be flexible. Now, can we maintain that flexibility even during relative peace times? Continue to be flexible so we are responsive to changing needs. We need to be agile. We need to change quickly so that we are able to catch these evolving trends. The other implication is on our graduates having work-ready skills. If businesses need to respond quickly to disruptions and trends, can they wait a year or 2 years for their employees to be upskilled? No, they have to respond to the trend today, or at most in a month's time, 3 months' time. So are we giving our graduates work-ready skills so that once they get into the workplace, whether at the undergraduate or the postgraduate level, that they can be work productive from day one? Right? So we need work-ready skills. And that paradigm of continual upskilling and reskilling needs to happen in order to ensure that each individual graduate, learner, student is able to remain relevant. The last 2 points are also very important. Today, high-quality education and lifelong learning opportunities are available to only a small segment of our population. How do we make it more accessible to the wider population? When MOOCs first started appearing a few years ago, there was a prediction, MOOCs is going to drive universities out of business. It's not true. We're still here. And it's probably not going to be true for the next 20, 30 years. I can't see beyond 30 years. There's a time and place for institutions like ours. But we need to find that role and be able to make our learning opportunities more accessible and affordable to the wider population. The great innovation that MOOCs brought about was increasing access. Many more people can now access high-quality content at little or no cost. But it's difficult for them to do credentialing. It's almost impossible for them to give learners a rounded experience of what it means to be in a cohort in an institution. Right? So we need to build accessibility and affordability into our offerings. So let me talk a little bit about where we see as the paradigm for the future education. And this is not rocket science. It's not comprehensive, but it's some ideas that we would like to think about. First, we need to move from a front-loaded system of education to one that's much more lifelong learning in nature. As I had discussed earlier, the key is really offering learning opportunities throughout life in a flexible, in a responsive manner. Our education and training systems, the traditional ones, it's relatively rigid. It's front-loaded. We invest heavily in K-12, and for those who are able to access higher education, the first 16 years of their lives spent on learning. And then perhaps after getting the first qualifications, they're thinking that I don't need to learn anymore for life. Right? But that's not true. We need a much more lifelong learning system if we want to respond to these disruptions. And along those lines, we need to create multiple pathways because not every student, not every learner can achieve the highest qualification within the first 12, 16 years of their lives. Some of them take a different path. They might get a very good high school diploma or maybe a technical certification. They go out to the workplace, they work for a number of years, become really skilled at what they're doing. Can they come back into the system and continue to advance in their academic and professional career? We should be able to do that. We don't do that very well today. So creating multiple pathways so that the workforce, the learners coming from different backgrounds, different contexts, continue to have access to quality education. I talked about having work-ready skills. So integrating work and study elements into our programs is going to be very important as well, so that our students, our learners, have work-ready skills when they graduate from our programs. In any time and space, there's always going to be a set of priority and emerging skills. In our day and age now, digital skills is very important. You hear people talk about digital marketing, artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, coding, programming. These are very important skills at this time. And even if you're not going to be a professional IT programmer or a data scientist, it's very helpful to at least have some understanding of what's underlying some of these technologies, so that when you're using it, when you are running your teams, when you're running your businesses, you know how to leverage on these cutting-edge technology. So having some provision of these priority emerging skills is going to be important as we think about designing our offerings in the future education. And finally, a very important point is how do we nurture within our learners a sense of curiosity, that they see themselves as lifelong learners. They don't have the mindset that if I'm done with my first qualification, I don't need to learn for life anymore. Because if individuals like you and I have a curiosity to learn and we see the need to learn, we will learn. We will find the MOOCs. We will find a education provider somewhere that we can access. We will find an institution that's going to give us that offering, and we'll find ways to learn for life. So I think we also need to be quite deliberate in nurturing that kind of mindset within our students. I'm going to share a little bit with you about a national movement that I led in Singapore, and we call it the Skills Future Movement. This is led by an agency reporting to the Ministry of Education, and the focus is on building that kind of paradigm for education that I had just described. We want to build a skilled, adaptable, and resilient workforce, and we need to look at how to build this within the context of educational institutions, of industry partners, of training organizations in Singapore. Now, to build an adaptive system, we really need a multi-stakeholder involvement. It is not sufficient for an individual government agency or an institution to try to build that on their own. It's great that we're doing our part, but we really need to pull in government stakeholders, we need training organizations, we need industry partners, trade associations to work with us. The underlying premise here is we need all these inputs on where the demand is shifting for skills, and then work to build that into the supply of skills, which is the domain that we're in. How do we supply the skills and the capabilities? But at the same time, we need to make sure that the various government agencies are aligned to be able to support such an effort at scale. And this is a big challenge in many parts of the world. And in Mexico, it's a big challenge too. In Singapore, we were kind of fortunate because it was small, and the government had a lot of ability to coordinate within itself. In other countries I work with, including the Philippines, we had to build coalitions of supporting stakeholders. So you can't get the whole government to work together at once, but we work with industry champions, pull in a few government champions, and start building the momentum so that over time we're able to build that ecosystem. And today, I'm very pleased to share with you, Philippines has their own Philippine skills frameworks that was modeled after the Singapore system. In this slide, I just described to you some of the initiatives under the Skills Future movement to give you a sense of the range of work that was done. Now, when you think about the future of skills, as I discussed earlier, we need to figure out with the industry what are the skills that they need today and in the near future, and where are the gaps. So the first piece of work is to start mapping out the kinds of jobs that are available in the industry, and for each job, what are the competencies needed? And these will be disciplinary competencies and transversal competencies, right? Soft skills, the horizontal skills. Because every person at a workplace not only has to deal with the technical needs of the job, but also the wider context of being productive within teams, within an organization, and dealing with change within the organizations. So in the Skills Future movement, we mapped out 34 skills frameworks across industries covering about 80% of the GDP of Singapore. So you can imagine that's a massive amount of work. Each skills framework was constructed through extensive consultation with the industry, large companies, small companies, experts in academia to come together to build that framework. And each framework took about 12 to 18 months to develop. Very long time, it's expensive, it's costly. But it gave us a base to start talking about where the skills are shifting and where do institutions need to shift as they think about the offerings that they provide. We're now using AI tools to try to automate that and to speed it up so that we are scraping website information to get a sense of where the skills are shifting. But skills frameworks, a major first step to take. Well, at the Tech, we have shifted to a competency-based education model, so we have mapped out the competencies for all our curriculum. That's a very helpful step in moving towards this agile, flexible educational system that I just described. By the way, the skills frameworks are available, open access. Each skills framework is about 400 pages long. There's a taxonomy of skills. If you're having insomnia, you can't sleep at night, please read through them. But you're welcome to access them and take a look at the taxonomy. There are about 11,000 skills in there. We map out career pathways and so on. It's a good resource to look at. Along with defining the skills frameworks is creating what we call skills-based progression pathways. One of the big frustrations with the workforce today is they have acquired lots of skills at the workplace, but they're not being recognized for it. If they come into one of your programs, do you have a way to recognize their prior learning so that they can progress more easily and quickly? Or do you put them through a standard 12 months, 18 months, 24 months program? Right? So if you have those mechanisms, you start creating that skills-based progression pathways to recognize competencies they acquire at the workplace. So in the range of work-based, skills-based progression programs that we've developed through with the various institutions in Singapore. Providing skills advisory is also quite important because a typical learner coming in to your institution, to your educational provider, would be lost. I know I need to pick up some skills in some areas, but what program do I go to? Which ones will give me the right skills for this job that I'm trying to get at? So giving advisory either through digital means, like a My Skills Future portal, or through face-to-face advising operations. Those are also areas to build on. We were fortunate to be able to mobilize government funding to support this effort. And so we provide training support, training subsidies to companies and to individuals to lower the opportunity cost of training. I mentioned about priority skills. There are specific programs that are focused on equipping various leaders within organizations with digital skills, including the executive, but also your middle managers and your technical specialists with digital skills and digital knowledge. I would also want to mention that what we call critical core skills, 16 transversal skills that we have defined are also very important, and we embed that within our training programs that we support in Skills Future. And to build that culture of lifelong learning, we have a number of recognition and awards. The highest level award is actually handed out by the president of the country. It's called the Skills Future Fellowship Award to recognize individuals who have embraced lifelong learning. And we try not to give it to professors. We give it to the technical people, your bus captains, a healthcare worker, those people who traditionally think that they don't need to learn or cannot learn for life, that they continue to progress and start making impact within the communities. That's also trying to help to build that culture. Just to give you a glimpse of the analytical work that had been done, we looked at the different areas of growth within the economy, and 3 areas had been identified to be very important: digital, green, and healthcare and care economy. And within each of these economies, we look at the kinds of jobs that are impacted by the different types of skills. And we build supply of these learning opportunities within the various programs that we support. So let me switch gears and talk about the Institute for the Future Education, where I'm at. As I mentioned, our goal is to impact the lives of millions of learners, traditional students and non-traditional students. And we want to do that in partnership with institutions, with policymakers, and with championing the future education under these 4 themes. And it forms a nice acronym, FAIR. So we like to say that the future education needs to be fair. It needs to be fit for purpose. How do we use technology to deliver education so that we have better learning outcomes? How do we modify or adapt our pedagogical methods to be able to deliver instruction that is relevant and engaging to different learners? If you take a working professional today and put them into one of our undergraduate classes, and you tell them, you know what, attend this, you're going to learn. It's not going to work because they come with their own background, their own experience. They're going to be bored. You cannot assume that they are clean slate like what we do for our regular students. So how do you adjust these delivery techniques, delivery modes, so that it's relevant to different learners in different levels of achievement, literacy, numeracy, to give them that lifelong learning opportunity? So fit for purpose. The second one, which I've discussed earlier, is making the future education more accessible. I would argue that the structure of our programs today, most of our programs today, make it hard to access. How many of us can take a year, 2 years off work to go pursue a graduate degree? It's going to be very difficult. Those of us with family and children and declining energy level as we age, it's difficult. And if you want me to put time in the evenings, that's going to take time away from my family, evening, weekends. How do we make it more accessible? How do we make it convenient so that I can go in whenever it fits me? Maybe I wake up early in the morning, maybe at night, but I do want to have that campus cohort experience. How do you make it accessible to different learners? And some people in the workforce work shifts, work long hours, your nurses, your security officers. How do you give them learning opportunities that maybe they can be learning at the workplace or in some other time slots? So making it more accessible requires us to rethink about how we design our programs, but also modularizing our programs so that they can become shorter, bite-sized, and more readily accessible. Future education needs to be inclusive. We are not catering sufficiently to the full segment of our populations. How do we use technology and free content that's available in many parts online today? How do we package and curate them so that it's accessible at an affordable rate for much more wider segment of our population, making it more inclusive? And creating responsive and relevant mechanisms for our programs. That is going to be more and more critical. We had a discussion earlier on the sidelines. If we're not catering to the needs of workers and industry today, what are they going to do? They're going to take their time and money elsewhere. If all of us ran 2-year programs, inflexible, it took a long time, the cost of sending an employee for your program is going to be very high. So now if I'm an employer, I need digital skills today, what do? I'm going to find alternatives. I'm going to hire from the open market, or I'm going to go to some startup or some educational provider that's able to deliver quickly. Now, so if as an industry, as an education industry, if we want to stay relevant to the needs of employers and individual workforce, we need to rethink how we are delivering our programs as well. I'll just mention quickly that we have defined a number of grand challenges that we're working on at the Institute, dealing with ensuring that our education offerings in teaching and learning are engaging, motivating, defining a competency-based education model so that we can be responsive to the needs of industry, supporting skills development of businesses, of the workforce, scaling up quality education to all segments of the workforce, but also trying to ensure that education remains affordable, not just to an elite segment, but to the wider population. So here's the money slide, as they call it. But it's not exactly money slide. I posed a number of questions to us to reflect on. Are we ready? Are we ready for the disruptions that I've just discussed? Are we ready to serve our learners, our customers, our economies, and our societies? And there are a few areas that we need to think about. The first is our education model. If we are not pursuing a competency and skills-based education model today, the challenge to us is we aren't really clear about what we are delivering to our students. Yes, we define learning outcomes, and we rely on the reputation of institutions to certify that somebody has achieved a certain qualification. But can we say for sure that person has that particular skill and competency for that particular job? Now, so unless we break it down into a much clearer view on what we're delivering, it's hard for us to make that statement. Take that one step further. Maybe you're delivering a lot of value today with your programs. As the industry skills needs shift, how do you know which part of your program do you need to modify? Well, we leave it to faculty, they're experts. Yes, it's great. But the faculty will do their magic, but you still cannot quite answer the question. I had to swap out these competencies and put those in because the industry is shifting. So having a clearer view, whether it's through a competency-based mapping or skills frameworks, help us to address that question. Along with that is the ability now to take different competencies and curate them in a way that is modular. So if I'm looking for somebody to upskill a marketing professional with digital marketing skills, they need to learn about social media channels, they need to learn about search engine optimization, and so on and so forth. But maybe they don't need all these other skills around data science for now. They don't need all these other skills around traditional marketing. They're already experts in the area. Now, with a competency-based model, you can assemble different parts that are relevant and deliver those that are relevant. Work-based and workplace learning, I mentioned that. It's important to embed those within the curriculum. So at the Tech, we're now also pursuing a challenge-based education model where we bring industry problems into curriculum design and work with our socios formadores to design learning opportunities, learning experiences, so that they have work-ready skills when they graduate. And I talked about a lifelong learning model. Thinking about our curriculum, but our students in a lifelong manner, so maybe we allow them to stack different modules as they learn into a larger credential. Now, it's a big challenge today. We don't do it very well at the Tech, we don't do it very well as an industry, because we have traditional systems. We matriculate the student, we enroll them, they pay tuition fees, and then we have them captive for a period of time. How do we create all this flexibility? It's not an easy challenge. Now, within our institutions, or maybe in the education system as a whole, new skills, new capabilities to forecast what is coming on the horizon, engaging industry to actually hear what the demand is. Now, those are capabilities we need if we want to keep pace with what they're doing. I talked about andragogy and instructional design. We have to rethink how we deliver instruction. Faculty that are very good at teaching undergraduate students, in my experience, not so good at teaching the workforce. Right? So this is an issue. So teacher training, teacher preparation, and maybe widening our pool of who we think is faculty, getting practitioners, getting adjuncts that's able to deliver to new groups of learners. The whole space about micro-credentials and alternative credentials is going to become increasingly important if we're going to modularize and deliver bite-sized learning. Our learners want to know that they can stack up towards a larger credential. That's where the value proposition is. Otherwise, I could take my money, my tuition dollars, and go to a private provider. Because they deliver what I need, I can do my job. But we as institutions have the ability to confer qualifications. Now, so if we give micro-credentials and allow them to stack up, I think that's going to be a competitive advantage that we're going to maintain. And then having the pathways for different learners to pursue their skills, but also their qualifications. The right-hand box, the least, actually the most difficult one, is governance and operations. For those institutions like the Tech, where we have lifelong learning entities, our units, a big tension is quality assurance. How do you ensure that they deliver quality offerings that is commensurate with the institutional practices? But if you have your regular process, they have to go through a Senate, they have to go through debate, they have to go take a year before they can get their program approved, you're not going to be responsive to industry needs. So we need a much more agile way of quality assurance and yet be responsive to what industry needs are. Faculty and industry practitioners, I talked about that. We need to have new capabilities within our faculty to be able to effectively deliver learning, facilitation to a wider range of learner profiles. In expanding our advising and career services, if I'm a displaced worker, I'm out of a job, and I come to an institution, I want to learn something. Tell me what I can learn. And then what kind of jobs can I go for? Now, we do that for our undergraduate students. And now we have to build new capabilities for other types of students. And finally, flexibility in our academic and administrative processes, and the biggest challenge. It goes from enrolling students to what we think about awarding credits, to what it means if they want to do different pathways across different schools. And when I think about what employers need, they don't need everything just from one school. I need it from this school and that school and that school. Now, how do we create that flexibility? And so those are challenges as well. So my last slide, let me just summarize. We have seen many disruptions affecting our economies, affecting education in the past couple of decades, and I would predict that we're going to see these disruptions at increasing pace and frequency, and the impact is going to be more and more widespread. As businesses in the industry, as individuals in the workforce, as educational institutional leaders, we need to transform, but we need new skills and capabilities. Right? That includes us in this room. I talked about the new capabilities that we need as an institution and as leaders in our organizations. In delivering that new paradigm education, it is important to have clarity on the competencies, the technical capabilities that we are nurturing within our learners, but also the soft skills and transversal skills. Because the environment is going to be more complex, and the soft skills and transversal skills are going to help our learners to be more successful in their careers. Industry and enterprises need to be part of this skills development ecosystem, so we need to draw them in. And in this new paradigm of education and training, it needs to be lifelong, flexible, adaptable, and accessible. Right? In education and training institutions, we must respond to this new paradigm. Now, the challenge for us is we have existing structures. We have schools, we have deans, we have faculty, we have programs, some of them very successful. Some of them maybe not so successful, but faculty is holding on to them. How do we work with them as an institution to transform, to be flexible, right? To modularize? That's a really big challenge, but I think it's necessary if we want to remain relevant. I think it would be really sad if our learners are going to skip the entire education system because they find we're no longer relevant. One of the big problems in the US now is many students are questioning the return on investment on higher education. Higher education enrollments are declining, and institutions are not responding fast enough. Then you have new startup companies like, let's say, General Assembly, and you can get a coding job without having to go to a college. Just come into General Assembly, go through a boot camp, you have the skills. Now, that's General Assembly, but you're going to have many more of these if we do not fill that market space. Graduate programs have the advantage because in many institutions, we have more flexibility at the graduate program level to innovate, to make changes, to have a different structure compared to undergraduate degrees. So perhaps we can use that additional advantage to look at how to be more flexible and innovative. A bunch of resources here, different reading materials around some of these concepts on the future education, on longer lifespan and so on. You're welcome to access the slides and take a look at some of the materials. That's it, that's the end. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm quite happy to, if we have time, a couple of minutes to have an interaction with you if there are any questions or comments. Thank you. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias a Michael Fung por su conferencia inaugural. De parte del comité organizador del Tecnológico de Monterrey y de Comepo, le voy a dar una constancia por su brillante conferencia y unos obsequios. Muchas gracias. Tenemos 3 minutos, me comentan, para preguntas y respuestas de parte del conferencista. Sí, adelante.
Someone in front here? This lady in front? Oh.
Levanten la mano y para poderles aquí adelante.
I think she had her hand up first, so.
Yes.
Gracias.
To translate. I'm going to ask you in English.
Okay,
if that's
please.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
So thank you so much for your presentation. That's very interesting. But for us, for the public institutions, it's some or represents some challenges, some like priority challenges about this swift, maybe, because we can just imagine that we can become a certifiers of some skills, and maybe not the traditional institutions of education that we are used to be. So how to make or how to be in this balance about the quality and the response to these needs of the education of the future. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you for the question, and I think you're right, it is a very difficult challenge. In my previous experience working with the universities in Singapore, we did a few different things. Just like what you mentioned, there is limited degrees of flexibility that they have in terms of modifying their graduate education programs, at least in the current offerings, because many times there's government funding involved, there are certain requirements, certain expectations, so they have to continue with the way that they're delivering graduate programs. The way that I've seen them become successful is they create new functions within the university to start building this capability and working with the schools to bring some of these elements of lifelong learning within the offerings, and over time, finding ways to increase the flexibility within the traditional programs. So creating new units and then building that momentum to start influencing the rest of the institution. But it takes a determined clarity of vision by the leadership to start making that shift. Because as individual schools, you're limited by your ability to make those adjustments. But I think that if, as an institution, we are willing to do it, and we have built new functions that will then build that capability over time, and the deans and the schools will start seeing the potential and work with this unit to expand and be able to be more flexible in the educational offerings. I hope that addresses your question. Thank you. I think there were some questions here as well.
Thank you for your lecture. I was wondering if you can provide some examples of the core skills you mentioned, and how did you come up with the 16 skills?
Well, thank you. So we took a look at the soft skills that are defined across, by different people. I think McKinsey has a set, and World Economic Forum has a set. And we also looked at the kind of competencies that we had within our skills frameworks. In creating that, we worked with Mercer, the human resource company, to survey many employers, global employers, to see what are the most critical skills that they need. We defined the 16 critical core skills in the areas of critical thinking, teamwork and collaboration, and managing change. Right? And so these are the three areas, and the 16 skills are grouped under each of these three areas. So critical thinking will be things like problem solving, complex thinking, and so on. And in the area of collaboration will be teamwork, communication, and in the area of managing change will be digital fluency, innovation, and so on. So we identified those 16. You're welcome to Google critical core skills, skills future. You'll see the 16 critical core skills there. It's not rocket science. I think we can group it different ways and have a different descriptor, but we believe that those 16 elements are critical for everybody, and whether you are a leader, you are a middle manager, or you are somebody at a technical level, it's important for everybody in those 16 core skills. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Michael. what would be your advice to advance towards a more flexible academic and administrative process at institutions?
Now, you want, here's the book. No, just kidding. It's no simple path. I think one of the first things we need to do is to deconstruct the concept of credit units. We're stuck in the credit units because there's this chunk of learning, and then we recognize it, and we give a credit unit. Don't get me wrong, we should still have credits. But how do we deconstruct that so that we can start recognizing smaller chunks of learning? I think that's one, and that's important. I think the second most maybe challenging area is how do we think about enrollment? Because that's where a lot of the administrative inflexibility comes, right? Because if you enroll, then you need to spend a certain amount of time and graduate, and so on. So on the administrative side, deconstructing what it means to enroll a student. On the academic side, deconstructing a credit unit so that we can recognize more bite-sized learning. And we need to learn to work better across our silos in our institution. Because if I need someone from social science school, someone from computer science school, and someone from business to come together to deliver, a learning, a transdisciplinary learning, to meet an industry need, we need to be better able to work on that. So culture of collaboration is important, deconstructing the credit unit, and making our enrollment more flexible. I think those are the three big pieces to work on. Thank you.
Todavía hay unos 10 minutos para preguntas y respuestas.
Thank you so much, Mike. Nice Spanish.
Thank you.
So I would like to hear from you a little bit about andragogy. It was under capabilities in the capabilities
Yes.
slide.
Yes.
So could you elaborate a little bit more on that? Thank you.
Okay. I think if we look at the learning science literature, one of the authors that I think had done quite a bit of work talking about andragogy, which is pedagogy for mature, experienced individuals or mature students. Jack Mesereau I think, has done a lot of work in that space. And there are a few key axioms, if I think about it, a few key principles that we need to think about when we deliver education to an experienced person. Not undergraduate students, but more experienced person. One is to make sure that we have a sense of their background, their prior experience that I mentioned. So if you already have some knowledge around, say, digital skills, for example, I don't want to repeat delivery of that. I need to figure out, oh, you have this level of digital fluency, I'm going to add on top of that, right? So recognizing the person's background is important for the working professionals coming into our educational offerings. The second one that's very important too is making the learning relatable. So examples that are relevant to that person, that industry, is very important. We've all been in webinars, including this one. Maybe we go in the webinar, we sit down, like, when is lunch? Somebody's speaking, like, oh, I'm not interested. Why? Because it's not relatable to us. It's not relevant, and it doesn't draw on your background. If I came in here and told you about all the policy that we enacted, and I gave you pages and pages of policy, I think most of you would be sleeping by now, right? So instructors need to make that the learning relevant and relatable. So those are, I think, the two biggest andragogical design concepts. And when we think about adult learner education versus undergraduates. But I would say that even for undergraduates, when we think about engaging learning models, we want students to be actively learning, active learners. How do we engage them? They need to relate to the challenge that they're working on. And that's why I think the challenge-based education model is has great potential. Because not just sitting through pages and pages of content, you're applying it. So some of those andragogical principles, I believe, is applicable at the undergraduate level as well. But especially for working professionals coming in with their experience, it becomes very important to ensure learning outcomes. Was there another question? Yeah.
Thank you. Very interesting. And I was wondering about scientific research. How can you apply this model? Because you need time, you need a lot of previous knowledge, and so, especially in experimental sciences. it's not very easy to see the transition from the classical learning to a new model. Can you explain
Yeah.
a little bit more
Yeah.
about? Thank you.
Yeah. So that's a very important question. Many times, even though we are academic institutions and we value knowledge and we value evidence-based research, many times when we run our organizations, we do something completely different, right? We either align to some policy or we align to some leadership directions. It's not a bad thing, but we don't have enough evidence. And so here, I think what's key is we need to increase the amount of effort that we're putting in place, what I'll call educational, institutional research, meaning the outcomes of educational interventions. So for example, at the Tech, when we introduce competency-based education, we have defined ways to measure learning outcomes so that we can assess whether particular interventions is effective. And we need to be evidence-driven in that journey. So developing evaluation tools and methodologies and trying different interventions and learning from those. I won't say that we're doing it very, very well. There's still this big space that we need to work on, which is more reliable tools for competency assessments, especially when you talk about soft skills. Right? For a technical skill, it's relatively easy. For soft skills, we're using rubrics. That's not the most scientific way, but we need to find better ways to evaluate different learning interventions leading to better outcomes. And that should drive the practice, the educational practice within our institutions. That's part of the research that we're championing at the Institute as well, to try to get clearer about some of these evaluation mechanisms. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael, for your inspiring talk.
Thank you.
I want to be more concrete. I know very few stories of success, particularly in mathematics and industry. Maybe CIMAT, a little bit IPCIT, and Tec de Monterrey. So I want to know what's your secret? I mean, in CIMAT, IPCIT are research centers promoted by CONACYT, and they receive funds from the government. You have a special institute to develop future thinking and industry relationships. Can you explain a little bit how do you do this contact with the industry, and how do you bring problems to the academy?
Well, let me just first, make a disclaimer. I'm only, with the Tech for 9 months at the moment. So I have colleagues who are much more knowledgeable about what we have been doing with the industry in bringing their perspectives. But let me also talk about it more broadly in my previous experience as well. So first, hearing the voice of our customers is very important. Bringing industry to the table and hearing what the needs are. And then be able to codify those needs and communicate to institutions at the institutional level that these are the needs the industry has. How do we contribute to that? In a more theoretical field, academic and theoretical field like math, it might be more difficult to see how do I directly meet an industry need. But there are jobs that requires those skills at an advanced level. And I don't, I'm not an expert in that field, but for instance, if you look at a lot of these artificial intelligence models, they are based on math. It's all about advanced statistical methods to be able to make sense out of patterns and be able to deliver these AI models. So I think there's a space for even the math discipline to be relevant to industry needs. But we're not structured today to collaborate with, say, the computer science folks and so on to deliver those kinds of offerings. So I would think that in the area like math, you could still be relevant, but we need to think about it at the institution level. How are we meeting industry's needs, our customers' needs? I don't know if that fully addresses your question. Of course, some of your directions are, in a way, influenced by research funding and so on. That should continue. You should continue to do that. But in terms of educational offerings, you could potentially adapt it to be more directly relevant to what the industry is looking for. Yeah. Thank you.
Muchas gracias por sus preguntas y por las respuestas que les ha dado Michael Fung. Nuevamente, muchas gracias a Michael Fung por su conferencia magistral. Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Michael, for your illustrative lecture.
Thank you. Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias. Gracias. I need new skills to handle so many of these now.
Muchas
Gracias.
Muchas
Gracias.
gracias.
Okay. Thank you.